Hey y'all, Big Tim here. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of The Truth Behind the Trophies. This is number 7 in the series, and this one comes to you from Maysville, Kentucky. 2011, this is the site of the Kentucky Bass Nation State Championship. It's kind of generic, but I'm the one that brought it home and put it on his wall. I'm real excited. This is Maysville. Maysville has always had my number. I've never done well at Maysville. Even though it's the Ohio River, there's something about it that has always kicked my butt. I've had a lot of tournaments up there, and I did win one years and years and years ago, a little club tournament. I think I had a total of 5 fish for 2 days that weighed like 7 pounds. So it was an ultra tough tournament, and I happened to be lucky enough to win that one. That was pure luck. But I was excited about this one because it was an opportunity to make another state team, and it was an opportunity for me to do well on the river. Again, I wanted to spend some time practicing, and the more time I could spend practicing, the better off I felt my odds were of having a good tournament. So Lori and I went up the Saturday before, and I'm not sure why I decided to put in at this ramp, but I went in and put up at a little ramp in Vance, Kentucky. Little tiny little ramp. Lori didn't like it at all. She called it spooky. But I thought maybe if I got up there away from some of the crowd, there's not as many creeks, maybe the fish would load up in some of the smaller creeks. I just wanted to do something different. And I fished the creek there at Vanceburg and didn't do so well. So then I wanted to try some river spots for smallmouth and possibly Kentuckies. And there's a lot of little blowouts, sandbars, all those kinds of things up there. I tried a bunch of them and didn't do well. We'd finally ran far enough up the river that there was a big creek there. And I didn't know it at the time, but come to find out it's Kinnickinnick, Some people might say Kinnickinnick, but I've heard it said Kinnickinnick. And we idled back through there just to see what it was like, and got to a point where there was like almost a bluff, something that you just don't see on the Ohio River very much, let alone the creeks. And it really looked different to me, and I loved it. So I decided to fish it. Caught a couple keepers there. Nothing of any giant size, but nice quality river fish. I think one was a smallmouth and one was a largemouth. And then we went up and they had this really cool bridge, and I fished around the bridge there and caught another keeper. And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. And when I got up that way, I noticed one of the other competitors in the tournament field was there. And I didn't want him to see me that I was catching him, but I kind of played it low key, and we talked a little bit, shot the breeze, but nothing of any consequence. So that was practice. I didn't feel a need to go up there on Sunday, so I went downriver and practiced, the same old stuff that I always fish. The creeks down toward Augusta, down below Maysville, and just really didn't do any good. And wasn't feeling it. So the rest of the week, I go about my work week and everything else, and still kind of wondering. So Friday, I take off early. Matter of fact, I don't know if I worked at all Friday. I've decided I'm going to go up and practice for a little bit. And I go up and I put in, there's a little ramp in Kinnickinnick. I forget the name of the little town or whatever it's called. I forget the name of it. But anyway, there's a little bitty ramp there in Kinnickinnick, and I put in there. And I didn't even get up there till at least noon, maybe 12:30. I go up there and I'm flipping my little brush hog around and got a few bites. I think I swung on 2 fish and caught them, and then had 2 more bites that I shook off. And I said, this is my spot. This is where I'm going to be. To have that many bites in such a short area, I knew that was the place to be. So that was my game plan. I pulled out early Went and got all my tackle ready, went back and got my hotel room together, ate dinner, got ready for the meeting, went back to the meeting and even had a couple beers. I was feeling so good. So when we have the meeting, I draw out my tournament partner for the next day. And he's a really nice old guy, but he's a really old guy. And I'm a little concerned because Kinnickinnick is about 40 to 45 miles upriver from Maysville. And the weather forecast had said that the wind was going to blow pretty good. So when I met John, I told him, he asked me, are you on any fish? I said, well, I think we can catch a few. We might have enough to win the tournament, but it's a long way and it's going to be really rough. John was like, we can do it. Let's do this. Let's get all over it. And I was a little concerned. I was like, man, I really don't want to beat this old guy up. I mean, John at that time, I'm guessing he was at least 65, might have been in his 70s. And he got around a little better than what I do now, but, you know, not real good. And he was just a super sweet old man. And like I said, I didn't want to beat him up, but he seemed game. So we went up there in the course of the morning, getting up there, the wind's not blowing too bad. And instead of throwing a baby brush hog, I pull out my little small green pumpkin beaver, my little smallie beaver. And ended up catching a pretty decent lemon up there. And John actually caught a few fish too. I think he had 3. At one point, John had, I can't remember, I think it was a jig. John had a jig on. And I had made fun of his rod a little earlier because it was a little whippy. And I look back and that sucker is doubled over. I'm like, John, what are you doing? He says, I got a fish. I said, well, get that sucker in here. He says, I'm trying. He's fighting and trying his hardest to get it up here. And he finally gets it up, and it's a little 10-inch fish. And I'm thinking, John, you need to get a new rod. That little bitty 10-inch fish had your rod all bowed over like that. Then he pulls up and shows me the other side of the fish, and it's got teeth marks all down the side of it. It's bleeding. He actually had a big old muskie. Kinnickinnick is known for muskie. Evidently, he caught that little bass, and the muskie come up and swallowed it. So he'd been fighting a muskie, and neither one of us knew it. But it was a lot of fun. When we left, I had a limit, and I think John had 2 or 3. And the wind had definitely picked up. Now, we were protected in there in that area we were fishing in Kinnickinnick. But when we got on the river, we could see it was blowing pretty good. We had a 40-minute run, 45-minute run back to Maysville. I'd already made a plan that I was going to pull up at the halfway point, Ohio Brush Creek, duck into the creek, relax for 5 or 6 minutes, fish around a little bit. If anybody's got to take a leak, go to the bathroom or whatever, that's the place to do it. But just to get out of the wind and waves and relax your body for a minute. So that's what we did. We ran to Ohio Brush Creek, pulled in there, took a couple minutes to get together before we made a run back. Now, if you're familiar with the river, between Ohio Brush Creek and Maysville, there's a couple of islands, Concord Islands, and the main river channel actually goes between the islands. The Kentucky side over there is a shallower side, and the Ohio side of the river is actually a deep enough channel. But I was a little concerned running the Ohio side because there's a couple snags, and I didn't want to take the chance on running those snags. I did know the river was up that day, so I took the gamble and went the shallow side, which wasn't near as rough, and ran the Kentucky side of those islands. And that didn't beat us up too badly. When we got back to the ramp, it had been a rough ride, but not as rough as what we thought it could be. And we weighed in, and everything was good. In fact, I was leading the day. I went to dinner that night with some other friends of mine, and man, I was feeling good. I was even a little cocky, which is not normally my style. But with these couple guys, they like to talk trash, so I let them have it a little bit. We're sitting there having our adult beverages and our dinner there at Applebee's and having a good time, and I'm thinking, got a pretty good shot of winning this deal if the fish hold up. So the next day, I'm fishing with a younger fella. I've got no worries. I know the wind is going to pick up even more. The water's going to drop a little bit, but since he's young, I know he can handle it. Now the difference is, like I said, Chad is a younger guy, but he had to work all night long. He might have gotten an hour and a half of sleep or so, but I'm pretty sure that he got none. I can't remember. It was either very little or none at all. And he came to the ramp straight from work, and then we made that run up to Kinnickinnick. He definitely couldn't sleep while we were running because the wind, while it wasn't super bad, it wasn't as smooth as it was Saturday morning. You know, Sunday morning was just a little rougher. But once we got up to Kinnickinnick, we're all protected by the wind, and that little smallie beaver was catching them again. And Chad was amazed because he lives up there. He's fished that area before, and he was like, you know where you're catching these fish is dry ground. I don't know that. I've never been up here before. And he's just amazed at where and how I'm catching them. And he starts catching them too. You know, Chad's a really good fisherman. I think if he had a full night's sleep, he probably would have won the tournament. I know that he did catch a limit with me, but I think he could have done better if he'd had a full night's sleep. There's no doubt if he'd have been with me both days, or if John had been with me both days. Either one of those two guys have been with me both days, they would have won the tournament for the co-angler side. But, you know, we were catching some fish. Now, most of the fish I'd caught up there, matter of fact, I would say of the 9 fish that I weighed in, 8 were Kentucky spotted bass, 1 smallmouth, and 1 good largemouth. And I didn't catch that largemouth till the last day. It might have been the last fish of the day for me. I finally switched over from my smallie beaver and decided to go with a bigger brush hog, a baby brush hog, which by profile is a little bit bigger than a smallie beaver. So I ended up catching that fish, have a good limit. I know I've got about 8 pounds. Time to run back. We're going to do the same thing, man. We're going to go back to Ohio Brush Creek, collect ourselves, relax for 5 or 6 minutes before we head back to Maysville. This time, after we go through Ohio Brush Creek, I realize that the river's dropped a little bit. I'm not so fond of running the Kentucky side anymore. And like I said, the Ohio side has a few snags, and I'm fine going through there at an idle speed, but I don't want to run through there wide open. So our only option was to go right down through the middle of the islands. The wind was blowing against the current, so it was stacking that current up heavily. The waves there were at least 5 foot tall, and I'm going to say 5 to 7. And I'm really not exaggerating. I remember we could see it from the distance. I stopped the boat. I realized that Chad is super, super religious. I said, Chad, I'm going to be driving this boat. I want you to pray for us as we're going through. And lo and behold, we made it through there. It was just like going through barge rollers, the biggest barge rollers I've ever seen. But that's what it was like. But we never took one over the front of the boat. It was amazing. We got back in plenty of time, and everything worked out. Now, I was a little concerned because one of our other buddies, since the river was up, decided to fish. There's a little pond right there at the release area of Maysville. And a lot of fish, when the river gets up, will sneak back in that pond. And he snuck back there and got himself a nice 4-pounder. And in fact, he had a really big bag, was the scuttlebutt that I heard at the weigh-in. So I was kind of concerned. Other than him, I've kind of figured I had this sucker won because everybody else had a really tough time on day 1. In fact, he actually had a tough day on day 1, but I'm pretty sure that Ricky ended up weighing about a 10-pound bag, which was really incredible for that time of year on the river. But his day 1 weight wasn't so good, so he ended up finishing second to me. I ended up having 1583, and Ricky ended up with 14 pounds. And it was just a great, phenomenal tournament. I was just so happy. This was the first time that I knew the moment before the tournament started that I was going to win. I was so comfortable. I was so relaxed. I had utmost confidence without being cocky. I just had a feeling deep down in my gut that I was going to win that tournament. And it was really nice to be able to make that happen. Just a great win. Now, other than the win, one of the other parts of the story was the wind. Like I said, it was really rough. Some of the other guys that I knew that were up there in Kenny Connect with us, they didn't leave as early as I did. And they just timed themselves getting back what it would normally take if you're running wide open with no waves. And man, I think they beat themselves to death. I mean, from the waves and the wind, I was sore basically from my shoulders all the way down to my knees for 2 days. Just, beating yourself in those waves. And these guys, they ran them 65 plus the whole way, so I know they were beat up. It was just a crazy weather weekend, just a great week, and a great win. Something I always remember. Lori and her folks were down there for it, which was really nice. Normally, I used to joke that when Lori's dad would come to a tournament, I never did good, and I was like, don't let him come anymore. But, they were there, and everything worked out nicely. So I hope you enjoyed this week's edition of Truth Behind the Trophies. Tune in next Monday for episode number 8, which comes to you from Harrington Lake in central Kentucky.